The South Australian government has set aside $4 million in its mid-year budget review for a treaty commissioner as it prepares to draw up treaties with Indigenous communities. The initial agreement is expected to be finalised within a year. The ABC's Indigenous Affairs editor, Stan Grant, says it will be Australia's first.
Australia is the only Commonwealth country, current or former, that does not have a treaty with Indigenous peoples. So South Australia, if it gets there first, will be the first of its kind. The reality is that Indigenous groups under various forms of title, native title and land rights, hold massive land right throughout Australia. About a third of the Australian land mass is under some form of Indigenous title, and as a result of that, there are rights emanating from that. There are agreements that need to be organised, agreements with business, agreements with local government, local councils, state governments, federal governments. There are a whole lot of current agreements, many thousands of agreements that overlap. I think what the argument is around treaty is that it gives some certainty and some surety to those currently existing agreements, establishes some benchmarks for dealing with each other, and there are issues of compensation, there are issues of land as well. What Australia is trying to do is to do something that is in fact retrospective in going back and saying that there was a lack of agreement, no treaty signed at the point of contact. So how do we now try to fashion something that does deal with issues of history, deal with issues of compensation, deal with the legal question, deal with the question of land, and give some certainty and surety to agreements that are already in place. There are big debates around the question of Indigenous recognition in the Constitution federally versus the need for treaties, and a preference that's been expressed among many Indigenous people that they would prefer to see treaties first. It's interesting here that what we're seeing is treaties carried out at a state level, because if you look at the types of issues it's dealing with, they are often issues that are the responsibilities of states. You're talking about education and health and housing and so on, that directly involve the state governments themselves. So we're already seeing a dual process, a process of negotiation for treaty in Victoria and South Australia, potentially in the Northern Territory. There is an agreement already in place in Western Australia known as the Noongar Agreement, which is a broad, it could be interpreted itself, in fact, as a treaty. At the same time as we're seeing this Indigenous recognition debate carried out, there are those who are opposed to it, and there are those who say, John Howard, when he was Prime Minister, how can a country have a treaty with itself? There are those who think that this is not going to lead to the improvements in Indigenous lives that are needed, that see this as being something that is potentially divisive as well. So it's not going to be an easy process, and there will be political opposition to it.